What's up, guys? We're back again. Today we're talking about the Declaration of Independence. We're going to talk about some ideas that are in it. We're also going to talk about who wrote it and who drafted it. So our target that we first talked about several days ago, we talked about Content Standard 8.1.4C, and it was to be able to understand the ideals established in American society, those of equality, inalienable rights, and the consent of the governed. Now, what I told most of my classes is that you probably know what these terms mean, you just don't know what they're called. Because you've grown up in the United States, most of you, you've probably experienced these in one way or another. But let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about, an idea in the Declaration of Independence, is the idea of equality. Now, equality, up in the picture in the top right-hand corner, picture of Scrabble. If you've never played the game Scrabble, definitely try it. It's a grandma game, but it's so fun. Play it with your family, play it with your friends. That's just my 2 cents there. So, equality. You guys know that equality means, in the United States, equal rights. It means everybody has the same thing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and tell you that everything is perfect in the United States. The ideal of equality is built into our Declaration of Independence, and we do strive to perfect and have the idea of equality, but that does not mean that everything is always equal in the United States. So, how is American society built on the idea of equality? Well, that's pretty easy. We love to think that America is the land of the free, the home of the brave. Everybody has the exact same ability to be successful, to be equal, to have the same exact rights. And you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. Equal rights. That may not happen all the time. You guys, you've probably seen it in the news lately or some other outlet, but when it comes to equality, that's something that American society is built on. The idea that everyone can do anything that they want, they have the same rights. So that's pretty easy. You should know what that means. We're going to move on to the next idea that's built into the Declaration. Inalienable rights is the next thing that we've talked about. A lot of you in the last few days have tried to pronounce this word and failed. It's pretty hard, though. So when we talk about inalienable rights are basically just rights that you have because you're a human. And because you have those rights, you cannot lose them. Inalienable rights are rights you have because you're human, therefore you cannot lose them. They cannot be taken away by human laws or regulations. Earlier this week, we talked about John Locke, and we talked about his theory of natural rights, the idea of life, liberty, and property, that those things cannot be taken away from a human, and therefore natural rights would be considered examples of inalienable rights, rights that cannot be taken away from you because you're human. I know I'm going over this fast, but it's something that you guys can get. That second definition here on this slide, rights that you have because you are a human, therefore you cannot lose them. Those are inalienable rights. Maybe you've heard it before, maybe you haven't, but hopefully you can pick that up. And we're going to move on to our last topic today, and that is consent of the governed, which sounds kind of scary, but it's not as scary when you break it down. So here we have a little chunk taken out of the Declaration of Independence, written by old TJ, Thomas Jefferson, and it says that governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute a new government. Now, a lot of you are probably like, what did I just hear? I can't even understand that. Yeah, and you're probably right. You're probably like most of my classes. But if we break it down, it gets a lot easier. So when it says governments are instituted among men, it means the same thing as if I was going to institute a new rule at the school or institute a new volleyball program or a lacrosse program or whatever you have. That means I'm just putting it into effect. So governments are instituted among men. Governments are created among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So if they're deriving their just powers, that means they get their powers from the consent of the governed. So it's basically saying that men have governments and they get their powers from the consent of the governed. Now, what is consent of the governed? If you guys know how to break things down, talking about consent's a pretty easy word to understand. It basically just means permission. If I asked one of these two girls in this room that are sitting in here with me, they're being very quiet, they're being great. But if I asked one of them if I could throw a marker at their face, and they said, yeah, of course, they would be giving me their consent to throw a marker at their face. They're just giving me their permission. Okay, so when we talk about consent of the governed, we're talking about permission of the governed. And when we're talking about the relationship between a government and the people, the ones that are being governed are the people. So basically we're saying here that governments are created among men and they get their powers from the permission of the people. Now it doesn't really sound so hard, does it? So consent of the governed, if you're taking notes here, if you want to simplify what that means, it really just means the permission of the people. So this whole passage saying governments are instituted among men, that means governments are created among men. They get their powers from the permission of the people. So whenever any form of government becomes destructive and they no longer get their powers from the people, it's the right of those people to abolish it, to get rid of it, and put in place a new government. And the reason why Thomas Jefferson put this in the Declaration of Independence is because what the colonists were experiencing when they were fighting Britain is the fact that the king wasn't exactly allowing them to be the ones with the power. The people weren't the one, the colonists weren't the ones with the power. It was actually the king. He made all the rules, he made all the taxes, he did all the bad things to the colonists. So Thomas Jefferson really tried to make a point in the Declaration of Independence to letting people know that they were the ones that had the power. It wasn't the government, it wasn't a king, it was the people. They were the ones in the end that had the power. So if you want a really good definition of consent of the governed, it is basically that the people have the authority. The authority of a government should depend on the consent of the people as expressed by votes in elections. Because if the government makes laws, do we vote on those laws? Yes, we do. We definitely go vote on those things. The government can't just say, well, I'm just going to put a tax on bread, and you're going to have to pay $3 more a loaf of bread because I said. No, the government can't do that. If they were going to make a law like that, which is ridiculous, but if they were going to make a law like that, they would call a vote. The people would get to vote on that. And if the people decided that a tax on bread was legitimate and they wanted it, then we would have a tax on bread. But if it was not, then we would not have a tax on bread. So consent of the governed basically is just the permission of the people. It shows that the people have the final authority in government. That's why I've got these pictures of a man and a woman on this slide. The one on the bottom is the best picture of me that I could find. Basically showing that they're strong people. They have the authority. They are the ones with the power. So in the end, the three ideas that are established in American society, the idea of equality, the idea of inalienable rights, rights that you have that you cannot lose, and the idea of the consent of the governed, that the people have the power, those are things that are in American society. You cannot get rid of them, no matter how hard you try. They're just the underlying ideas of America and its citizens. So that is Content Standard 8.1.4c. That was our target for the other day. Now, the day after that, we went over Content Standard 8.1.4D, and this one is much easier. At least to me, it's much easier. We wanted to evaluate the contributions of Thomas Jefferson and something called the Committee of Five in drafting the Declaration of Independence. So, first of all, we got old Thomas Jefferson here. Surely you've heard this guy's name before, but he was the main author of the Declaration of Independence. Okay? Thomas Jefferson was inspired by the guy we talked about earlier this week, John Locke, who came up with the idea of natural rights and also contributed to the idea of social contract theory. Thomas Jefferson was picked to author the Declaration of Independence by the Committee of Five, which we'll learn about that in a second. But when we read the Declaration of Independence, we are reading the words of Thomas Jefferson. They picked him because he was young, he was smart, he was a leader, and they believed that his written word was better than anyone else's in the committee. So Thomas Jefferson was the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence, and in the end, his contribution to the Declaration was the fact that he wrote it. Pretty easy. Okay, so the Declaration of Independence. Let's talk about that for a second. You may not know this, but the Declaration of Independence is split into 4 separate sections. Those 4 separate sections are called the Preamble, the Declaration of Natural Rights. The 3rd section is the section of grievances, and the 4th section is the Statement of Independence. So those 4 sections we're going to talk about very briefly. The first one is the Preamble. And basically the Preamble is what we would call an introduction. If you guys were writing an essay, it's just the introduction. They're explaining why the colonists are creating the Declaration of Independence. Just very much in short, telling the reader what's about to come next. So that's the Preamble, the first section, the introduction to the Declaration of Independence. Then you have the second section, the list of natural rights. Now, we talked about natural rights earlier this week with John Locke, the idea of life, liberty, and property. And in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson changes up the wording a little bit. He changes it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and talks about how all men deserve life, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this section basically just states some general ideas of how government should work, that people should have certain inalienable rights, that they should have certain natural rights, rights that cannot be taken away from them. It also states that the people should have the power and not, a king, because that's what the colonists had experienced. So the second section is really just listing the natural rights that Thomas Jefferson believed that all Americans should have, making it easier for them to understand how a government should work. In the third section, you have your list of grievances. And last week, we talked about what a grievance was. Basically, it's just a problem. I think last week, in our videos last week, we explained that with the idea of, if somebody was going to break up with somebody, and they were going to give them reasoning, they would say, I don't like you because blah, blah, blah. I don't like you because you were snapping with this other girl, you were DMing them on Instagram, whatever you're doing, okay? But the reasons why that person is going to break up with them, those would be considered grievances. They're just problems that you have with somebody. So the third section states all of the problems that the colonists had with King George III, the King of England. All the reasons, all the taxes, okay? Everything that he did to the colonists to make them upset at England. So this section states the details and a long list of grievances about King George. They're the reasons why the colonists are declaring independence. So they're basically saying, King George, we don't like you, and these are the reasons why we do not like you. In the last section of the Declaration of Independence is really probably one of the easiest ones besides the preamble, and it's the Resolution of Independence. It's the formal statement of independence by the colonists saying, we've already told you we think we deserve natural rights. These are the reasons why we don't like you. And so, because of these reasons and because of our actions, we are going to declare independence from you. And from now on, we will be an independent nation, and we will call that nation the United States of America. So, the fourth section is them formally declaring that we will be the United States. We are no longer part of Britain. We are severing those ties. They're not going to be there anymore. So, those are the four parts of the Declaration of Independence. Something that you should keep in mind in the future on upcoming quizzes that you may have. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about, which is pretty simple, is the Committee of Five. Now, the Committee of Five, they were the five guys that the Second Continental Congress basically said, we're going to write a Declaration of Independence. We're going to declare independence from Britain. You guys are the ones that are going to do it. So those five guys looked at each other and said, okay, well, let's figure this out. Those five guys were John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and Benjamin Franklin. So these five guys, they get together, and they are basically the ones that are responsible for writing a rough draft of the Declaration of Independence. And these guys are known as the Committee of Five because they were the ones, the five men that were coming together to draft the Declaration. Because somebody's got to do it, right? When you write an essay, you get your ideas down on paper, that's known as your rough draft. These guys were the ones that had to draft the Declaration of Independence. So hopefully, through this video, if you were absent or whatever, wherever you were, you got a kind of an idea of what we've been talking about the last few days. Maybe you missed one day, maybe you missed two, but hopefully this can help you out. If you guys have any questions about anything that I've taught today on this video, just come ask me, let me know before we take our quiz so I can help you out there. Something that I also haven't addressed is in this particular content standard this week, Content Standard 8.1.4, I have not given a secret question. So I do have to come up with a secret question for right now. I'm not using a slide. Hopefully you're listening to the audio of this because it is not in the other video. It is hidden in this video, and this is it right here. So here's the secret question. Make sure you email me the answer so you can get a free homework pass. 1 second. Let me come up with a secret question. My secret question is, there is a particular character that is sitting on my desk. It's one of those Funko Pop toys. Maybe you've seen one of those Funko Pop toys before in your life, okay? So you've had to be observant to get this correct. Maybe you are thinking about it later, okay? This particular toy comes from an anime that I watch, and I'm not going to tell you the name of the show, but I've spoken about it before. If you can, by next Friday, find out the name of the main character of this show, or the name of the show, because they're the same answer, and you email me that answer, I will give you a free homework pass. It has nothing to do with the Declaration of Independence, but yeah.